The corridor of the old space outpost was dark and silent. Dim lights flickered on the walls and the hum of broken machines filled the air. A human traveler named Daniel walked slowly, his boots echoing with each step. He had come here to find supplies, but the place felt abandoned, almost like a ghost town. As he turned a corner, he heard something faint. It was not the sound of machines, nor the whisper of leaking air. It was softer, almost like a breath, almost like someone holding back a sob. Daniel stopped, his eyes narrowing. He thought maybe it was just his mind playing tricks. But then he heard it again. He moved carefully, his hand resting on the small weapon at his side. The sound came from behind a stack of metal crates. Half covered in dust, he bent low, and what he saw made him freeze. A small figure crouched in the shadows, shaking, trying to make itself invisible. The figure was not human, but it was not frightening either. It was a girl, clearly alien but with features that showed both beauty and fragility. Her skin had a faint glow. Her eyes were large and filled with fear. She hugged her knees tightly, as if the world had hurt her too many times. Her lips moved, but no words came out, only silence. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest, like he was staring at a wounded bird. He raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "Hey," he whispered softly. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." But the girl only pressed herself tighter against the crate. Trembling even more around her neck, Daniel noticed something strange. A metal collar, dull and heavy, locked tightly. Lines and markings ran across its surface, glowing faintly under the flickering light. Daniel frowned, taking a cautious step closer. The girl did not speak, her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her throat moved as if she wanted to say something, but only silence came out mute, Daniel realized. The collar was not just decoration. It was something else, something darker, something cruel. He knelt down, keeping his distance so she would not feel trapped. Her wide eyes followed him, full of both fear and a small spark of hope. For a moment, neither moved, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Daniel's heart beat faster. He felt the weight of the moment. Why was she here, alone, abandoned in this forgotten place? And why that collar? He stretched out a hand, not to grab her, but to show kindness. "Are you lost?" he asked softly. Though he knew she could not answer, the girl lowered her gaze, her small hands brushing against the collar as if she wanted him to understand. The markings glowed faintly again, symbols that looked like writing, but not fully human, not fully alien. Daniel leaned closer, his curiosity burning. The collar was more than just a chain. It was a message, he was sure of it. But the girl pulled back, hugging herself tighter. Her silence was painful, like a scream that could not escape. Daniel felt anger rise inside him, not at her, but at whoever had done this, who would place such a thing on a child, who would take away her voice. He clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath to calm himself. The sound of metal creaking echoed down the corridor. Daniel spun his head quickly, his instincts sharp. Someone else was in the outpost, footsteps heavy, distant. But drawing closer, the girl's body tensed, her eyes wide with terror. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, silently begging him not to leave. Daniel understood then. She was hiding. She was running from someone. Whoever they were not friends. He looked at her once more, and then back at the dark hallway. His mind raced. Should he risk helping her or walk away? But the thought of leaving her there, mute, alone, chained by that cruel collar, twisted his heart. Daniel made his choice. He reached his hand out again, his voice steady but gentle. "Come with me," he whispered. "I'll protect you." The girl hesitated, her body trembling, but her eyes locked on his. In them she saw no threat, only sincerity, only human warmth. Her small fingers moved slowly, nervously, until at last they touched his hand. A silent trust was formed in that moment, fragile but unbreakable. Daniel pulled her gently from the shadows, hiding her behind his coat. The footsteps in the distance grew louder, echoing through the empty halls. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Whatever story was locked inside that collar, it was dangerous, and soon he would find out the truth. But for now he had a new mission, to protect the mute alien girl who could not speak, and to uncover the secret that made his chest tighten with both fear and sorrow. Daniel led the girl carefully through the dark corridors of the outpost. The footsteps behind them faded, but he knew danger was still close. The girl clung to him, her small hand gripping his coat tightly. Her silence was heavy, but her eyes spoke louder than any voice. They reached an old storage room, half broken and covered in dust. Daniel pushed the door shut and leaned against it. Breathing slowly, the girl stood in the corner, her glowing eyes watching him. The collar around her neck shimmered faintly, the strange markings alive with soft light. Daniel crouched down in front of her, speaking gently. "I need to understand," he whispered. "This collar. It's not just a chain, is it?" The girl lowered her gaze, touching the collar with her fingers. Her hands trembled as if the metal burned her skin, but she did not try to remove it. It was clear she could not remove it, even if she wanted to. Daniel pulled a small light device from his pocket and shined it at the collar. The markings grew brighter, lines of alien script mixed with fragments of human letters. He frowned, confused, running his finger just above the surface without touching it. The words shifted slightly, as if reacting to his presence. It was not just a collar. It was a message, alive in some way. The girl's eyes filled with fear as he leaned closer. She shook her head quickly, pressing her hands together as if begging him not to read. But Daniel's curiosity was stronger than fear. He whispered, "Don't worry, I only want to help." Her lips moved, but again no voice came, only silence that tore at his heart slowly. He began to piece together the symbols. He was no expert in alien languages, but some of the words were similar to trade dialects he had seen before. A few human letters appeared between the alien script, broken but clear enough. One line caught his attention, "property of," but the rest was burned away. Daniel's jaw tightened, his suspicions darkening. Another section glowed faintly, and the words formed into something softer. It seemed to be a name, though incomplete. Lie. Then the rest dissolved into unreadable scratches. Daniel looked at the girl, pointing softly to the glowing letters. "Is this your name?" he asked. His voice steady, the girl's eyes widened, and tears welled up. She nodded quickly. Her small shoulders shaking, Daniel's heart twisted, anger and pity mixing inside him. She had been reduced to nothing but markings on a collar. Her voice stolen, her name broken, her freedom stolen. What kind of people could do this? He pressed his hand against the floor, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He wanted to rip the collar off, but he could tell it was dangerous. The technology was advanced, too advanced to break without hurting her. Instead, he decided to study more. He traced the other symbols carefully, his mind working fast. The collar carried fragments of a story. Words like taken, auction, and price appeared faintly. Each word was like a knife cutting deeper into his chest. Daniel looked at the girl again, her silent tears rolling down her glowing cheeks. He understood now. She had not been lost, she had been sold. The outpost was not just empty. It had been a place of trade, a place where beings like her were treated as nothing. The thought made his hands shake, but he pushed forward. More words appeared. Voice locked, punishment, and silence. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He realized the collar was not only a chain but also a prison. It forced her to be mute, to live in silence. It was a cruel invention, one made to crush spirit and hope. The girl reached for him suddenly, grabbing his wrist, her eyes pleaded. Begging him to stop reading, Daniel froze, meeting her gaze. She was afraid of the truth being spoken aloud. But Daniel understood. She had lived in fear so long. The truth itself scared her. Still, he could not walk away. "I promise," he whispered, "whatever this is, I won't let it control you." For a moment, she stared at him, her eyes trembling. Then, slowly, she released his wrist and lowered her head. She trusted him, even if fear still chained her heart. Daniel leaned back against the wall, his mind heavy. He had only uncovered fragments, but it was enough to see the picture. This girl had been someone's possession, forced into silence marked with pain, and yet she had survived, hiding, waiting. It made him wonder, had she been waiting for him? For someone to read her story? The silence of the storage room was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the collar. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The strange markings were more than words. They were a cry for help, a record of suffering, and maybe, just maybe, a message left for whoever would care enough to read outside the room. A distant sound echoed, metal boots striking the floor. The danger had not passed. The ones searching for her were still out there. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew time was running out. But one thing was now clear in his mind. He could not abandon her, not after what he had learned. Her story was written in pain, but he would make sure it ended in hope. Daniel sat in silence for a long moment, the glow of the strange collar reflecting in his tired eyes. The alien girl sat across from him, her knees pulled to her chest, her gaze fixed on the floor. Though she never spoke, her silence felt heavy, like she was carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Daniel's fingers moved gently across the collar's surface, avoiding direct touch. The symbols and letters seemed alive, shifting faintly, as though whispering secrets from another time. Each fragment he read brought more anger to his chest, but also more determination. He needed to know the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. The girl flinched when his light device shone brighter on the collar. Her glowing eyes lifted, meeting his, filled with fear and warning. Daniel softened his tone, his voice low and calm. "I know you're scared," he said, "but this collar is your story, and I need to hear it so I can help." Her hands trembled, but after a pause she gave the smallest nod. Permission, fragile and silent but real. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes scanning the markings again. This time the collar seemed to respond to her acceptance, the glowing letters shifting clearer than before. What he read made his breath catch. The words were fragmented, but together they painted an image of cruelty. "Taken from Homeworld," the markings said. Another line read, "Mother cried," followed by broken characters that dissolved before he could finish. Daniel's jaw tightened, the image of a child torn from her family burning into his mind. The girl hugged her knees tighter, her glowing skin dimming slightly as if in shame. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "This isn't your fault," he whispered. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Though no sound left her throat, he turned back to the collar, forcing himself to keep reading. The next fragments cut even deeper. "Sold. Chains. Auction of 3 moons." Daniel's stomach twisted. He could almost see it. An alien market filled with greedy eyes, hands reaching for her like she was nothing but an object. He clenched his fists, fury burning inside him. How could anyone treat life with such cruelty? The girl's body shook, her silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Daniel wanted to stop, but he knew he couldn't. The truth had to be uncovered. If he turned away now, she would remain trapped in silence forever. Another set of markings glowed faintly, harder to read but clearer under his light. Voice locked. Obedience. Silence until freed. Daniel's heart sank. The collar wasn't just a prison. It was designed to erase her voice, to make her nothing more than a shadow. He reached out instinctively but pulled his hand back quickly, afraid that touching it might hurt her. His chest tightened with helplessness. The girl placed her small hand on the collar, her eyes filled with pain. She looked at Daniel, as if asking him if he finally understood. Daniel nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Yes," he whispered. "I understand now." Her tears glistened in the dim light, but in her silence there was also relief. For the first time, someone had read her pain. Someone had seen her truth. Daniel could almost feel her emotions pressing against him, like waves of sorrow and hope mixed together. Then he noticed one final line. Hidden deep near the base of the collar, it was weaker than the others, as if it had been fading for years. Carefully, he adjusted the light and read the words. "To the one who finds her, please protect our daughter." Daniel's eyes widened, his chest tightening so hard it hurt. Her parents had written this, knowing she might one day be found, knowing she might one day need saving. The girl's head snapped up when she saw his reaction. Her glowing eyes locked onto his. Searching, desperate, Daniel swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in his eyes. He whispered, his voice breaking, "Your family. They loved you, they wanted you safe." Her lips quivered, though no words came, but her tears flowed freely now. She pressed her small hands to her chest as if clutching her family's memory. Daniel wiped his face roughly, trying to hide his own tears. But the truth weighed heavily on him. He had uncovered the past, and it was worse than he had imagined. She had been stolen, sold, silenced. And yet through all of it, she had survived. The fact she was sitting here now, alive and breathing, was nothing short of a miracle. The air in the storage room grew colder as a sound echoed outside. Heavy metal boots, closer this time. Daniel's instincts flared. The hunters were still searching. The girl's body froze, her fear returning instantly. Daniel moved quickly, placing himself between her and the door. His jaw set. He had seen enough of her past to make one promise in his heart. Whatever monsters had taken her voice, whatever beings had broken her life, he would not let them take her again. Not while he was alive. Daniel knelt before her once more, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, his voice steady even as his chest burned with emotion. Her glowing eyes widened, filled with both shock and fragile hope. For the first time since he had met her, Her trembling slowed in that silence. Trust grew stronger, like a fragile light in endless darkness. The past was cruel. The markings told a story of pain. But Daniel knew the story was not over. A new chapter was about to begin. One where the girl would no longer be a silent prisoner. One where humanity's kindness would fight against the cruelty of the stars. And Daniel was ready to write that chapter with her no matter the cost. The dim storage room was filled with silence. But inside Daniel's chest there was a storm. The collar's markings had revealed more than enough. Fragments of sorrow, chains, and a desperate plea from the girl's family. Yet one last section of script pulsed faintly, hidden deep in the metal. It was almost as if the collar itself resisted him, unwilling to give up the final truth. Daniel steadied his breath and focused his light on it. The girl shifted nervously, her glowing eyes filled with warning. As if she knew what he was about to read, her trembling hands touched his arm, silently asking him to stop. But Daniel shook his head gently. "I have to see this through," he whispered, "for you." The words emerged slowly, broken symbols twisting into lines of meaning. Daniel's eyes traced them, his pulse quickening with every phrase. The collar was not only a prison, it was also a record, a cruel mix of technology and memory. It held her story so that even if she could not speak, her suffering would be displayed to anyone who dared to look. Finally, the last line formed clearly and Daniel froze. It read, "She carries our last hope if you read this. Protect her as your own child." His throat tightened. The air caught in his chest. He stared at the girl, the silent creature clutching her knees, tears shining on her cheeks. In that moment, Daniel saw not just a mute alien girl, but a daughter, a child abandoned to cruelty, entrusted to strangers who might never come. The weight of her family's plea crushed him. His vision blurred, and before he could stop it, his eyes filled with tears. It was not weakness. It was not fear. It was the raw pain of humanity, the ache of witnessing injustice too great to ignore. Daniel covered his face with his hand, but the tears slipped through his fingers. The girl watched him in shock, her trembling slowing. Her kind had known cruelty, but she had never seen a human cry for her. Her lips quivered as she reached out timidly, placing her small hand against his wet cheek. Daniel lowered his hand slowly, letting her touch remain. Her skin was cool and faintly glowing, her hand shaking, but her eyes were full of wonder. For the first time she saw someone not turning away from her pain, not ignoring her silence, but feeling it as deeply as she did. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "I'm so sorry. No child should ever endure this." The words meant little to her in language, but his trembling voice and shining tears spoke louder than any translation. Her own tears fell silently, dripping onto her collar, glowing softly in the dim light for a brief moment. The heavy silence between them felt sacred, a bond stronger than words. Daniel had not only read her story, he had accepted it into his own heart. But the storm outside their fragile moment was growing. The sound of boots echoed again, louder, closer, their hunters searching the outpost room by room. Daniel clenched his jaw, his sorrow burning into resolve. He wiped his face roughly, forcing his voice steady. "They won't take you again," he said firmly. "I promise." The girl's eyes widened at his determination. She pressed her hand over her collar as if shielding the last plea of her parents, then gave a tiny nod. Her trust in him deepened, fragile but strong enough to withstand fear. Daniel rose to his feet and checked the small blaster at his side. He had faced dangers before, pirates, mercenaries, smugglers. But this felt different. This was no mission, no job. This was personal. He glanced back at the girl, who stood nervously but no longer tried to hide. Her silent courage was small, but it was enough to give him strength. The footsteps outside stopped. Voices murmured in a guttural alien tongue. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The girl already knew. She had lived in silence for so long it was second nature. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on him, her trust unshaken. Daniel moved closer to the door, every sense alert, every muscle tense. He knew the moment of choice was near. To walk away and leave her fate in the hands of monsters, or to stand against them with nothing but his will. But when he thought of her family's plea, the words carved into that collar, his decision was already made. He would fight no matter the odds. Daniel turned back once more, meeting her eyes. "You are not property," he whispered, his voice filled with fire. "You are someone's daughter, and now you are under my protection." The girl's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but the collar held her silence. Instead, her tears shimmered. and she pressed her small hand over her heart. It was her answer, her vow to him. Daniel's chest burned with both sorrow and fierce resolve. He had never felt such a mix of grief and determination. The tears that had once weakened him now hardened into steel. The hunters outside had no idea what they were about to face, because a human's tears once shed could turn into the sharpest blade of all. The door rattled suddenly as heavy fists pounded against it. The girl gasped silently, clutching Daniel's sleeve. He stepped in front of her, weapon ready, his eyes no longer wet but burning with fury. The truth of her past had broken him, but it had also remade him. He was no longer just a traveler searching for supplies. He was a protector, and the tears of a human had given birth to something unstoppable. The pounding on the door grew louder, each strike echoing through the metal walls. Dust fell from the ceiling as the storage room shook. The girl's glowing eyes widened with terror. Her small hands gripping Daniel's coat tightly. Daniel pressed his back against the door, holding his weapon steady, his heart beating like a drum. The voices outside were rough, cruel, and filled with hunger. He could not understand every word, but the meaning was clear. They were searching for her. Their tone carried no kindness, only ownership, only greed. Daniel's jaw tightened, his anger rising again. The door handle rattled violently, then stopped. Silence followed, heavy and dangerous. Daniel knew they were planning their next move. He turned to the girl, whispering quickly, "We can't stay here. They'll break through soon." The girl nodded shakily. Her fear clear, but her eyes showed trust. Daniel moved to the far side of the room, scanning the wall until he found what he was looking for, a small maintenance hatch, rusty but still functional. He pulled it open and motioned for her to crawl inside. She hesitated, shaking her head, not wanting to leave him. But Daniel's voice was firm. "Go now. I'll be right behind you." Her glowing eyes searched his face, and finally she obeyed. She slipped into the narrow tunnel, her small frame disappearing into the darkness. Daniel gave one last look at the door, then followed her quickly, pulling the hatch closed behind them. Just as the heavy door to the storage room burst open with a crash, the tunnel was narrow and dark. The air thick with dust, Daniel crawled fast, keeping the girl close ahead of him. Behind them, voices shouted, metal clanged, and the sound of boots echoed as the hunters stormed the room. They would not give up easily, Daniel knew, but he also knew he could not let them take her again. The girl stopped suddenly, pointing ahead with trembling hands. A faint light glowed at the end of the tunnel. Daniel crawled faster, pushing them both forward until they emerged into a larger chamber. The room was filled with broken machinery, piles of wires, and a collapsed ceiling letting in weak starlight. The girl stumbled to her feet, her breathing quick though still silent. Daniel stood quickly, scanning the shadows for danger. The chamber felt open but exposed, too easy to be trapped. And then he heard it, the sound of boots approaching from another corridor. The hunters were spreading out, surrounding them. Daniel grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her behind an old machine. He crouched low, his blaster ready, his heart heavy with the weight of his promise. The girl clung to him, her glowing eyes wide. She had already lost so much, and now her fate balanced on this single moment. The voices drew closer, and Daniel caught sight of them at last. 3 tall figures in dark armor, their faces hidden behind cruel masks. Their weapons glowed faintly, advanced and deadly. One of them spoke in a harsh tongue, pointing toward the chamber. They had her scent, they knew she was near. Daniel pressed his finger to his lips, reminding the girl to stay silent. Not that she could speak, but her fear could give them away. She nodded quickly, pressing herself against his back, trembling but trusting. The hunters moved with precision, spreading out to cover the exits. They were professionals, used to capturing lives. Daniel's mind raced. His weapon was strong, but not enough against 3. He needed more than firepower. He needed cunning. Slowly, he picked up a loose metal rod from the floor and tossed it across the chamber. It clattered loudly against the far wall. The hunters turned sharply, 2 of them moving toward the noise. Weapons raised, Daniel seized the moment, pulling the girl to her feet and rushing toward the narrow exit opposite. But the 3rd hunter saw them, his voice rising in a harsh shout. A beam of energy shot past, searing the wall near Daniel's head. The girl gasped silently. Clutching his arm, Daniel fired back, the blast striking the ground at the hunter's feet. Forcing him to retreat, the chamber exploded with noise, light flashing as weapons fired. Daniel pushed the girl ahead, shouting, "Run! Don't stop!" Her small feet scrambled across the broken floor, her glowing figure darting through the shadows. Daniel fired again, his shots quick and sharp, keeping the hunters back, but he knew they would not retreat forever. They wanted her too badly. At last they burst into another corridor. Narrow and winding, Daniel grabbed the girl, pulling her around corner after corner until the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. They stopped in a dark alcove, both of them breathing hard. The girl's hands shook as she pressed them against her chest. Tears shining in her eyes, Daniel put his hand on her shoulder firmly. "I won't let them have you," he whispered in that moment. She looked up at him with something new in her gaze. Not just fear, not just hope, but belief, for the first time since he had met her. The mute alien girl seemed to believe she might survive, that she might be free. But Daniel knew the threat was not gone. Only delayed, the hunters would regroup, and they would come again, stronger. He tightened his grip on his blaster, his jaw set with iron. The fight was far from over, but his promise had only grown stronger. The threat had returned, but so had something else. A human's will to protect and a human's tears turned into fire. The corridors of the outpost were silent again, but Daniel knew it was only a temporary calm. The hunters were regrouping, their heavy boots echoing faintly in the distance. The girl clung to his side, her glowing eyes wide with fear, yet steady with trust. Every step they took together was a step against the cruel fate written on her collar. Daniel stopped at a broken control room. Pulling her inside, the panels flickered weakly, sparks jumping from torn wires. From here he could see the corridors on a cracked screen, shadows moving as the hunters searched. They were methodical, relentless, and armed with weapons far stronger than his own. The girl pressed her hands together tightly, her silent lips trembling as if she wished she could speak. Her eyes begged him for safety, but also carried something more. A question. A hope. Daniel knelt down, placing both hands on her small shoulders. "You've been running long enough," he whispered. "But it ends here." She shook her head quickly, her hands waving in warning. She didn't want him to fight. She didn't want him to get hurt. But Daniel's expression hardened, his voice steady. "This is my choice," he said firmly. "They will not own you. Not while I breathe." Her glowing eyes shimmered with tears. But she stopped shaking her head. She understood this was not just about her anymore. This was about what it meant to be human, to choose compassion over fear, courage over safety. Daniel would not walk away. Not from her, not from this. He studied the broken control panels and found a power relay still active. With quick hands, he rerouted wires and pulled free a loose capacitor. If timed right, he could overload it, turning the chamber into a blinding trap. It would not defeat the hunters, but it could give him an edge. The girl watched him work, her hands gripping the collar around her neck. She stepped forward suddenly, tugging at his sleeve. Her eyes pleading, Daniel paused, meeting her gaze. She pointed at herself, then at him, then shook her head fiercely. Her silent message was clear. She did not want him to risk his life for her. Daniel smiled sadly, brushing a hand gently across her hair. "You don't understand yet," he whispered. "This is what humans do. We protect even when it hurts." She froze, her eyes widening at his words slowly. Her trembling hands lowered, and she nodded. Her silent acceptance gave Daniel the strength he needed. The sound of boots grew closer, voices echoing harshly in the corridor. Daniel positioned the capacitor near the doorway, connecting the wires loosely. He motioned for the girl to stay low behind a broken console. Her glowing form crouched obediently, eyes locked on him with both fear and faith. The first hunter entered the corridor. His armored frame filling the space, Daniel fired quickly, his blast striking the wall beside him. The hunter snarled, raising his weapon, but Daniel pulled the wire. The capacitor sparked and erupted in a burst of blinding light. The corridor filled with smoke and static. The hunter stumbling blindly, Daniel charged, slamming his shoulder into the armored figure. They both crashed against the wall. Daniel's blaster pressed against the weak joint of the armor. He fired, sparks bursting as the hunter roared and fell. The girl gasped silently, her eyes wide with shock and fear. 2 more hunters stormed in, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Daniel ducked behind cover, firing back, the blasts shaking the walls. One bolt grazed his shoulder, searing pain tearing through him. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. The girl crawled closer, her glowing hand reaching out. As if to give him strength, Daniel looked at her, his pain easing at the sight of her bravery. She had suffered so much, yet here she was, unbroken. Standing with him in her silence, he shouted, his voice filled with fire. "You will not take her." The hunters advanced, but Daniel rose again, firing with precision, forcing them back step by step. Every shot, every move carried the weight of his choice. He could have walked away, he could have hidden, but he had chosen instead to stand. Not for glory, not for survival, but for her, because humanity was not measured only by strength, but by the willingness to fight for the weak. The hunters regrouped at the far side of the chamber, their leader raising his weapon for a final strike. Daniel braced himself, ready to face the end if it came. But then he felt a small tug on his arm. The girl had stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter than before, her silent tears streaming. She placed both hands over her collar and the markings lit up violently. The script that once spoke only of sorrow now pulsed like fire. The hunters hesitated, confused. Daniel stared in shock as the collar's glow spread, lines of light racing across the floor like veins of energy. He realized then, the collar was not only a prison, it carried power, power tied to her, and now, for the first time, it was responding to her will. The girl closed her eyes. Her tears falling, her silence remained, but her heart spoke louder than words. A pulse of light burst outward, forcing the hunters back with a shockwave. Daniel shielded his face, his body shaking from the force. When he looked again, the hunters were stumbling. Retreating into the shadows, the chamber fell quiet, only the crackle of broken wires filling the air. Daniel stared at the girl, still glowing faintly, her small frame trembling from exhaustion. She opened her eyes slowly. Looking at him with silent fear, Daniel moved quickly, catching her before she could collapse. "You're safe," he whispered, holding her tightly. "I swear it," her glowing eyes softened, and for the first time her trembling stopped. She pressed her head weakly against his chest. Her silence was still there, but Daniel no longer needed her voice to understand. She trusted him completely, and he had proven that humanity's choice was not to abandon but to protect. Outside, the hunters would return stronger and angrier, but Daniel no longer felt fear. He had made his choice, and so had she. Together, they would face whatever came next, for in that moment, in the ruins of an abandoned outpost, a mute alien girl and a tearful human had created something stronger than chains. They had created hope. The outpost lay in silence, broken only by the hum of damaged machines and the faint drip of leaking pipes. Daniel sat on the floor of the ruined chamber, the mute alien girl resting against him, her glowing skin dim but steady. Her small hands clutched his coat tightly as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. His arm wrapped around her, protective and strong, his eyes fixed on the shadows beyond. The hunters had fled for now, forced back by the strange power of her collar and his desperate fight. But Daniel knew they would not give up forever. Slavers never did. To them, she was not a child, not a person, but stolen property, a valuable prize, and yet to Daniel, she had become something far greater. She was a responsibility, a promise, a life worth more than his own. He looked down at her collar, its glow now faint, the markings no longer shifting. It had shown him her pain, her history, her family's last plea. It had stolen her voice but could not erase her will to live. Daniel brushed his fingers gently across it, whispering softly, "One day, I'll take this off you, I swear it." The girl's glowing eyes lifted to him. Filled with quiet trust, she pressed her hand to her heart, then to his chest. It was her way of answering. She believed him. Daniel rose slowly, lifting her in his arms. Her small frame was light, but the weight of his choice pressed heavy on his shoulders. He stepped carefully through the broken corridor, searching for a way out of the outpost behind them. The echoes of the hunters faded into silence ahead of them. The path was uncertain, but it was theirs. They reached the outer hangar at last, where Daniel's ship waited like a loyal companion in the shadows. It was old, patched with repairs, but still strong enough to carry them far. The girl looked at it with wide eyes, awe breaking through her fear. She clung tighter to him as he carried her aboard. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of freedom inside the ship. Daniel placed her gently on a seat and began preparing for launch. The engines rumbled awake, the panels lighting up one by one. The girl watched him, her glowing eyes following every movement. She could not ask where they were going, but she did not need to. Daniel spoke without looking at her, his voice firm. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they'll never find you." She tilted her head, a small spark of hope flickering in her gaze. Hope was something she had almost forgotten, but now, sitting inside a human ship, hearing his promise, she felt it again. The engines roared, the hangar doors opened, and the ship rose slowly. Daniel's hands gripped the controls, his focus sharp. The outpost grew smaller beneath them until it was nothing more than a dark shape floating in the endless void. The girl pressed her face to the window, watching as the stars spread out before her. For the first time since her capture, she was leaving a prison behind. Daniel glanced at her, and a rare smile touched his face. "You're free now," he whispered. Though he knew true freedom would come only when the collar was gone, still the moment was real and it mattered. Hours passed as the ship drifted through the stars. Daniel finally set the autopilot and returned to the seat beside her. The girl looked up at him, her glowing eyes full of questions she could never ask. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, then said softly, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this. I won't leave you." She reached for his hand, placing her small glowing fingers in his. Her silence spoke louder than words. She believed him, and for her that was enough. As the ship traveled through the dark, Daniel thought of her family's message carved into the collar. "To the one who finds her, please protect our daughter." His tears returned, softer this time. Not from sorrow, but from the weight of love. He whispered to the stars, "I'll protect her." "I'll keep your promise." The girl leaned against him, her glowing skin casting faint light across the cabin. Together they looked out into the infinite void, not as captor and prisoner, not as alien and human, but as something closer. Survivors, companions, family. The hunters would come again, stronger. The collar still bound her voice. The galaxy remained cruel and dangerous. But none of that mattered in this moment, because a human had chosen to weep for her, to fight for her, to protect her. And in that choice lay the heart of humanity. For humanity was not only war and strength. It was kindness in the darkest night. It was courage when all hope seemed lost. It was the tears shed for a silent child who could not speak but could still be heard. As the ship vanished into the sea of stars, a new beginning had already taken shape. The mute alien girl was no longer alone, and Daniel, the human whose eyes had filled with tears, was no longer wandering without purpose. Together they had become each other's light. And somewhere in the endless sky a brighter future waited.